In this video, we'll learn how to remove the background from an image in Inkscape and replace it with a different image. We'll also apply a few different effects to make the two images match a bit better. To start, I need to import the images I want to use, which I can do by going to File, Import. The two images I'll be using are this image of burning buildings and this one of a corgi. If you would like to use the same images to follow along, you can find links to them in the description below. But of course, you can also use your own images if you like. Okay, to import the corgi image, I can double click it, then click OK here. And I'll do the same for the burning buildings. Alright, next I want to cut the corgi out of this image. To do this, I first need to trace around the corgi, which I can do with the pen tool here. And because the outline of the corgi is mostly made up of curves, to make the tracing easier, I'll change the pen tool mode up here to BSpline. BSpline automatically creates curves for us as we click, unlike the normal Bezier mode, which requires clicking and dragging. Okay, now I'm going to zoom in on the corgi by holding down the Control key and scrolling up the mouse wheel. I can also pan around the canvas by pressing down the mouse wheel and moving the mouse. Now I'll start tracing. And I won't worry too much about getting it perfect, because I'll be feathering the edges later to make it look better. When I get back up here, I'll click the first point again to close the path. Okay, now I'm going to click the white color swatch down here to give the path a white fill. And we want to use white because we'll be using this path to mask the image. And any color that isn't white will cause the image to lose opacity, as we'll see later. I'm also going to turn off the stroke of this path by holding Shift and clicking the red X here. Now I'll go to the Select tool, hold Shift and click the image to add it to the selection, and to set the mask, I'll right click and choose Set Mask. Okay, so the corgi has been cut out of the image, but the edges of the corgi don't look too great. I can still see some of the background at certain parts. To fix this, I'll use feathering, which basically blurs just the edges of an object, making them look more smooth. And I actually need to perform feathering on the mask object before using it to mask the image. So I'm going to right click the corgi and choose Release Mask to get the original image and mask object back. Now I'll deselect everything and select just the mask object, then go to Filters, Blurs, Feather. I'll go ahead and check Live Preview here, then start raising up the strength setting a bit. As you can see, this blurs the edges of the object. That's way too much though, so I'll bring it back down. That should be good. Now I'll click Apply and close this out. Then I'll select the mask and the image again, right click and set mask. Nice. Now you might be wondering why I didn't just use clipping instead of masking, which is also used to cut out parts of objects. And the reason is that clipping ignores certain characteristics of the mask object, including its blur. So if I right click and choose Release Mask, then right click and choose Set Clip this time, it ignores the feathering that I applied. Okay, so I'll press Ctrl Z a couple times to go back to masking. Next, I'll move the corgi over to the burning building image. And I'll click this button up here that says Raise Selection to Top to put the corgi above the building image. Now I'll scale down the corgi using the scale handles while holding Ctrl to maintain the aspect ratio. He looks pretty proud of his deed, but he doesn't quite match his new background very well, so I'm going to add a few effects to make him fit a bit better. First, I'll change up his color some. I can do this with a colorize filter, which I can find under Filters, Color, Colorize. I'll go ahead and check Live Preview here. With this filter, I can change up the lighting on the image. I can also go to the Color tab here and change the color of the lighting. Because he's surrounded by fire, I'll make the color kind of a dark orange. I will also need to increase the alpha channel some. If I go back to the Options tab, I can play around with the blend modes here. For blend 1, I think multiply looks pretty good. And for blend 2, I'll just leave it on normal. Okay, I'll click Apply and close this out. Next, I'll go to Filters, Color, Lightness, Contrast. With this filter, I can adjust the lightness a bit more, as well as adjust the contrast. That should work. I also feel like he's a little too blurry. To make him sharper, I can go to Filters, Image Effects, Sharpen. That's good, but not good enough, so I'll undo with the Ctrl Z, then go to Filters, Image Effects, Sharpen More. That's better. Next, I'm going to create some shadows near the corgi's feet, so he doesn't look like he's floating. For this, I'll go to the Pen tool and create a path down here. I'll turn off the stroke and give it a black fill. Then I'll open the Fill and Stroke dialog with this button up here. And at the bottom of the dialog, I'll increase the blur setting and lower the opacity. Now I'll go to the Select tool and click this button up here that says Lower Selection one step to put the shadow under the corgi. I'm going to duplicate this shadow by right-clicking it and choosing Duplicate. Click the Lower one step button again and shrink this one down some. I'll also make it a bit more opaque. Now I'll go back to the Pen tool and create one more shadow covering some of the bottom of the corgi. I'll turn off the stroke, make the fill black, increase the blur, and lower the opacity. Okay, not bad. I'll go to the Select tool now and select the corgi and the shadow objects. Then I'll right-click and choose Group. This will allow me to move around and resize the corgi and his shadows together. Next, I want to cut out some of the background, leaving just a small area around the corgi. For this, I'll use clipping. First, I'll go to the Squares and Rectangles tool and create a rectangle over this area. And I can go ahead and raise the opacity of this all the way up. Now I'll go to the Select tool, hold Shift and select the background, then I'll right-click and choose Set Clip. One more thing I can do is make it so the background gets more and more blurry from bottom to top. This will help the corgi stand out just a little bit more. To do this, I'm first going to duplicate the background, and I'll click the lower one step button to put it below the corgi. Now I'm going to blur the duplicate just a bit. So right now the ground is blurry as well, which isn't what I want, so I'm going to use masking to hide the bottom part of the blurred image. However, I also want to fade in the blur. For this, I can use a gradient mask. First, I'll create a rectangle completely overlapping the top 3/4 or so of the background. Now in the Fill and Stroke dialog, I'm going to click this button to give it a linear gradient fill. I'll select the bottom stop in here, make it white, and raise the alpha channel all the way up. Now with masking, the closer to black the mask is, the more transparent the masking will become, and the closer to white it is, the more opaque it will become. So I'll go to the Gradient tool over here, grab the black stop on the left, and move it down to just above the bottom boundary of the rectangle. Now I'll grab the white stop, hold Ctrl to restrict the angle, and move it to the top of the rectangle. Next, I'll go to the Select tool, hold Shift and select the background, right-click, and set Mask. And I can increase the blur to strengthen the effect. And there we go. Now we have our happy and possibly evil corgi with his new background. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.